What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my week 1 wide receiver start sits. Went through my running backs yesterday. If you guys missed that one, the way I kind of set up these videos is I'm going to break down every single week 1 matchup, talk about every single fantasy relevant wide receiver. The starts are going to be the guys you trust in your wide receiver 1, your wide receiver 2 spots. The fringe options, these are more of like your flex plays. Maybe you don't love them as a top 2 wide receiver, but they're certainly playable, especially as flex options, maybe in those top 2 spots if you kind of punted the wide receiver position. And then sits, obviously players that you would prefer to keep on your bench. Week 1, there's going to be a lot of solid wide receiver plays. There are some wide receivers that are going to be sits where when we get, into bye weeks, have more injuries, these guys are definitely going to be playable, but the bar is going to be a little bit higher in week 1 just because there are so many quality options. There's going to be timestamps in the description for every single matchup if you guys want to jump around to your specific players. If you enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll also have my, positional rankings coming out in a few days, running backs, wide receivers, so stay tuned for those. But let's just dive right into the Thursday night matchup here. Very solid wide receiver matchup between the Cowboys and the Eagles. For the Cowboys, you're obviously firing up CeeDee Lamb as a high-end wide receiver 1. You drafted him mid to early round 1. He is going to be a lock in your lineup. Now, I'm someone who's higher on George Pickens than consensus, but I don't think he's like a smash start here in week 1. This is a tough matchup. The Cowboys actually project really poorly in terms of implied points. I want to say they're actually like bottom 5 this week going up against a tough Eagles defense. So this week, I'm going to view him more as a wide receiver 3. I do think, though, in better matchups moving forward, George Pickens is someone that I'd feel confident, firing up as a top 2 wide receiver. Then for the Eagles, they're going to put up points. Obviously not going to be the most pass-heavy attack, but I think A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are both strong starts. For A.J. Brown, I think he's a wide receiver 1. Devonta Smith, more of like that back-end wide receiver 2 option, but I still think he's someone who I'm going to designate as a start here. Then for the Friday night game, we have the Chiefs taking on the Chargers. And for the Chiefs, I'm firing up Xavier Worthy as a start. If you drafted Xavier Worthy, the most confident you're likely going to feel playing him is early on in the season with Rashee Rice suspended. So if you felt confident enough to get him on your team, this is where you should be locking him into your starting lineup. And then going to be sitting those depth options, Hollywood Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster. I am kind of interested in seeing how Hollywood looks. Missed all of last season, had some hype coming into 2024. So what role will he play? But definitely not someone who I'm considering starting in like your normal size leagues with, normal roster setups. And then for the Chargers, I'm obviously firing up Lad McConkey as a very strong wide receiver 1 play. Keenan Allen, I think, might become relevant, but week 1, I would hope you have better options in your starting spot. Then moving over to Sunday, we have a divisional matchup between the Buccaneers and the Falcons. For the Bucs, obviously Mike Evans is going to be a start for you, but I'm very high in Emeka Egbuka, and with the injuries to Godwin, McMillan, even though he's a rookie, I actually feel confident firing him up as like a solid wide receiver 2 this week. He's a very pro-ready wide receiver. He has been getting a ton of buzz out of camp. I really liked him as a prospect. So week 1, if I drafted Emeka Egbuka, I would feel confident with him in my starting lineup. And then for the Falcons, obviously Drake London, going to be a locked-in start. I think Darnell Mooney is someone who will be very playable. I think he's a really nice later-round wide receiver pick. His ADP has kind of fallen, even though he's been dealing with like a very standard shoulder injury. So I think in the future, Mooney will be playable, but like week 1, you probably drafted him as like your wide receiver 4, 5, 6. I would hope you have better options to slide into the 2 wide receiver spots and then your flex options. So Mooney will be a sit this week, but someone who I do think will be playable moving forward. Then we're going to have the Bengals taking on the Browns. For the Bengals, you're obviously firing up both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as very solid starts. The wide receiver 1 and 5 in points per game last year. They are both going to be locks in your lineup. And then for the Browns, I have Jerry Jeudy as a fringe option. I do think Joe Flacco at quarterback is going to be big for these weapons. He's going to go out there. He's going to sling it. We saw really extreme splits with Jerry Jeudy with and without Jameis Winston last year. He was an absolute monster with Jameis. Without Jameis, he really struggled. I think Joe Flacco is a lot closer to that like Jameis Winston side as someone who's going to go out there, rip it, give his pass catchers a ton of opportunities. So Jerry Jeudy as a wide receiver 3, I think is very fair in week 1, especially against a defense that is susceptible to giving up a lot of points. Obviously, this Browns offense does not project well, but if there were a matchup where you feel pretty good about Jerry Jeudy, this would definitely be one of them. And then I'm going to be sitting Cedric Tillman. It'll be interesting to see who kind of steps up if this offense can support more pass catchers than Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku, but in week one, I'm just not really trying to mess around with it. Moving over to this Dolphins Colts matchup. For the Dolphins, I do think Tyreek Hill is a really strong start. You drafted him as like a fringe wide receiver 1. He should be a lock in your lineup. Jalen Waddle, I did kind of go back and forth. He's like right in like that back end wide receiver 2, higher end wide receiver 3 range. I am a believer in Jalen Waddle. I think he's going to have a really nice bounce back season. So I did lock him in here as a start, but more of like that, back end wide receiver 2 play. Then for the Colts, I really like Josh Downs. I think Pittman could also have a bounce back season, but week one, I would hope you have better options. So all these Colts wide receivers are going to be sits: Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell. I will say, of like all the week one passing attacks, the Colts are one of the offenses I'm more interested in. Just seeing how this passing attack looks, how involved Tyler Warren's going to be. What are the routes that Josh Downs is getting? Does Pittman look like he's a lot better? Like, is he bouncing back? I think there's a lot of potential questions to be answered here with the Colts, but just not trying to mess around with them in the first week. Then we have a very interesting matchup here between the Panthers and the Jaguars. These are two offenses that I'm probably a little bit higher on than consensus, especially for the Jaguars. So for the Panthers, I know Ted McMillan's a rookie. I still feel confident firing him up as a really solid wide receiver 2 option. I think Jalen Coker is a really nice sleeper. I'm going to talk about him tomorrow in my waiver wire video. He should be rostered in a lot more leagues. I do think him kind of stepping into that slot role, he should be someone who could become interesting, especially if this Panthers offense is a little bit better than expected. Then for the Jaguars, obviously BTJ, he's a 1-2 turn pick. He is going to be a lock in your starting lineup as either, a solid wide receiver 1 or a very strong wide receiver 2. And then Travis Hunter, I did fight the urge to just straight up list him as a start. Might, have a little bit of an acclimation period, but I still think he's playable as like a wide receiver 3. We saw the usage in the preseason. He was, pretty much a full-time offensive player, getting a lot of work in the slot. I think we're going to see this Jaguars offense overachieve. Love the addition of Liam Cohen. And I think Travis Hunter is going to have a really strong rookie season, especially if he's getting the type of usage that we saw in the preseason, and then have also heard, Liam Cohen talk about, and then just the general reports out of the Jaguars camp. In the next matchup, we have the Raiders taking on the Patriots. Not the prettiest wide receiver rooms here for the Raiders. If Jacoby Myers does play, I think he's a fringe option as like a wide receiver 3. Typically been someone who's like very high floor, low ceiling. Going to command a lot of volume. I think he's fine as a wide receiver 3 play. And then going to be sitting Dante Thornton, Amari Cooper, Jack Besh. It'll be interesting to see what the wide receiver snaps look like. But outside of Myers, really no interest in week one. And then for the Patriots here, I'm also going to have Stephon Diggs as a fringe option. He might be someone who kind of heats up later on in the season coming off the torn ACL, but he should be the clear wide receiver 1, right out of the gate here. And I am higher than consensus on this Patriots offense. I think we could see a leap from Drake May. So wide receiver 3, Stephon Diggs, I don't think is crazy. Then we're going to have the Cardinals taking on the Saints. For the Cardinals, I am a little bit skeptical about like Marvin Harrison Jr. taking this huge leap, but I still think he's going to be better. I think he can be a wide receiver 2 this year. So starting in week 1, don't hate this matchup against the Saints. I think the Cardinals can come out, start their season on a positive note. I'm going to have Marv here as a start as more of like a back-end wide receiver 2 option. And then for the Saints, I do like Chris Olave this year. I think I'm just buying into a talented player. Now, I am not high in this quarterback situation. Spencer Rattler starting week 1. That doesn't feel ideal, but I don't really think they have an ideal answer in their quarterback room right now, at least in terms of like projections. So I will have Olave more as like a back-end wide receiver 3 option. I do think at some point, though, you just have to rely on the talent. I know Chris Olave is talented. I think his biggest red flag coming into the season was the concussion issues, but he's not concussed heading into week 1. I think he's fine in your flex. And I think Rashid Shaheed can give you some boom games, definitely has flashed some talent over the last couple of seasons, but in terms of like reliably starting him, especially in week 1, that's just not something I'm super comfortable with. In the next matchup, we're going to have the Steelers taking on the Jets. These two wide receiver rooms are really just like manned by one dude. So for the Steelers, it is DK Metcalf. I'm going to have him as a fringe play. This is a tough matchup here against the Jets. They have a very strong secondary. I still think he's playable, though, as like a flex wide receiver 3. Then for the Jets, I am actually really interested in seeing this offense. As a Bears fan, I do want to see Justin Fields succeed. I do have, some real reservations here, especially with him as a passer. I don't think Garrett Wilson has a super high ceiling, but I do think he's going to get peppered with targets. He's really like the only competent weapon they have in terms of pass catchers in like the wide receiver and tight end rooms. So I'm going to have him as a start as like a back end wide receiver 2 play. We're going to keep it rolling with a divisional matchup between the Giants and the Commanders, two teams that I think have really solid wide receiver 1s. Obviously for the Giants, you are firing up Malik Neighbors with a lot of confidence. Someone who's going to go out, command a ton of volume. He was peppered with targets last year. It doesn't seem like things are going to change this year. Feel very good about Malik Neighbors, super talented young player. Wan'Dale Robinson was also peppered with targets last year, but was just super inefficient with those opportunities. Really, really low ceiling. He's not someone I'm looking to play in week 1. And then for the Commanders, Terry finally got his contract situation figured out. I do think there are some concerns where this could be like a slow start, wasn't with the team, maybe not in the best condition heading into week 1, but he's Jaden Daniels wide receiver 1. Maybe instead of being like that mid to high end wide receiver 2, he's more of like a fringe wide receiver 2 option, but I'm still feeling good about him in my starting lineup in week 1. And then Deebo Samuel, some people might think he should be a fringe option. I just think with all the wide receivers out there, I am a little bit lower on Deebo than consensus. I think he showed some real signs of kind of falling off last year. It'll be interesting to see what his role is here as like the number 2 option. So I'd kind of rather wait and see it with Deebo here. He will be a sit for me in week 1. Then we're going to have the Titans taking on the Broncos. Really tough opening matchup here for the Titans and Calvin Ridley. You have a rookie quarterback going up against one of the best defenses in the NFL. You have Calvin Ridley potentially matching up against Patrick Surtain. I'm going to list him as a fringe option. I still think he's going to command a lot of volume. More of like a back-end wide receiver 3 this week, though. And then sitting Tyler Lockett, I do think he's going to start off the season as the wide receiver 2, but I think his days of being super fantasy relevant are probably over. And then for the Broncos, I think Courtland Sutton is a fine start. He's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 on an offense that looked pretty solid last year, could take another leap. I'm also going to be watching, Marvin Mims, Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin. I think these are all guys who could take steps, young wide receivers who could be more involved this season. So watching those young players. Also, moving over to the 49ers taking on the Seahawks. I'm really excited to see how Ricky Pearsall looks this season. Obviously, just weird circumstances heading into year 1 where he was shot, didn't play until like midway through the season, wasn't super involved, and then really like breaks out over the last couple of games. With, some of the injuries offensively, Jawan Jennings dealing with a calf injury, also having like a contract dispute. He is going to have a runway to just completely ball out this season, but we haven't seen it yet. So I'm not going to like confidently fire him up as a top 2 wide receiver in my lineup, but I do think he's very playable as a flex. And if he goes out there, has a big week 1, then I think he could just be like a locked in start throughout the rest of the season. And then Jawan Jennings, I think if he was fully healthy and like didn't have this weird contract thing, he would be a much more confident start. But just with him missing a lot of time, we don't even know if he's playing. He will be a sit for me this week. And then for the Seahawks, a little bit lower on JSN than consensus. I don't love this overall offensive situation, but I still think he's going to command a lot of volume. He should be their clear-cut target. He'll be a start for me, going to be sitting Cooper Kupp and Torrey Horton. Torrey Horton is kind of an interesting young player with MVS getting cut. He's a very clear path to be a starter, be that X wide receiver, kind of winning down the field. So that's interesting. Cooper Kupp, I kind of just feel like he's over the hill at this point. I don't see him being super fantasy relevant this season. And if you are playing him, it's probably later on in the season when you have bye weeks, lots of injuries. Like in terms of a fresh lineup, I'd hope you're not having to rely on Cooper Kupp in week 1. We're going to have a divisional matchup between the Lions and the Packers. For the Lions, you're obviously starting Amon-Ra St. Brown with a ton of confidence. J-Mo's going to be a fringe option for me. He's definitely a little bit of like a volatile week-to-week play where if he has that big play, he's going to work out. It's also possible, he catches 2 passes for like 20 yards and you're feeling disappointed. I think he's very fine as like a boomer bust wide receiver 3. Then I'm going to be sitting Isaac Tesla. Has kind of made some noise. They clearly want him to be their wide receiver 3, but definitely not considering starting him here in the first week of the season. Then for the Packers, Matthew Golden, a rookie. I think he's a nice like fringe option wide receiver 3 in week 1. He's really been impressing in camp. You have Jaden Reed, who's banged up. It does seem like they want Matthew Golden to be their clear-cut number one target. So also going to be sitting Reed, sitting Romeo Doubs. I wasn't the biggest Golden guy as like a prospect, but I'm willing to adjust. I think his price for redraft is pretty fair, and I wouldn't hate him in my lineup in week one. We've got a few games left here. We have the Texans taking on the Rams. For the Texans, Nico is obviously going to be an auto start every single week. Then you have like interesting depth options here with Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. Imagine Christian Kirk is better than the young guys early on. I think we see Higgins start to gain throughout the season, but week one for me, it's Nico, and then not considering playing these other three options. And then for the Rams, I think Puka and Devontae Adams are both going to be really strong weekly plays. I'm kind of buying into this Rams offense as long as Stafford can stay healthy, which it seems like he's fine heading into week one. I think both these guys are going to kill it for fantasy. I believe this is the Sunday night game. We have the Ravens taking on the Bills, two of the best teams in the league, but not super exciting in like the wide receiver department for the Ravens here. We do have Zay Flowers. I feel like he's like the definition of a fringe option, especially in week one. Now, this could be the year he takes a year 3 leap and really balls out, but through 2 seasons, he has just been a locked-in, established wide receiver 3. That's how I'm viewing him here in the first week of the season. I really like Rashad Bateman. Nice like depth piece. I like the player. Signed an extension, I believe, this offseason, but in terms of week one, he should not be in your starting lineup. And then for the Bills, I could see arguments for both Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman being fringe options. For Keon, I kind of want to see it first. It was an underwhelming rookie season. He's had a lot of hype coming out of training camp, but let's actually see that translate to the NFL field. And then for Khalil Shakir, his ceiling is just so low. Like, yeah, he's going to command volume. In PPR formats, he will be solid, but week one, am I super excited to play Khalil Shakir? Probably not. I think he's a much more viable option when we're getting into bye weeks and injuries start to pick up. And then for the final game of the week, we have the Vikings taking on the Bears. For the Vikings, you are obviously starting Justin Jefferson, locked in there, mid to high end round 1 pick. And then I'm going to be sitting Adam Thielen. We have the Jordan Addison suspension. Thielen's probably going to be more involved in the first few weeks, but not a guy I want to be relying on in my lineup early on in the season, or probably at all this year, if we're being honest. And then for the Bears, as a Bears fan, I'm obviously excited for this game, but also just for fantasy, I think this offense is really exciting. I think there's a lot of upside, but I also think there's some room for downside here. So for these wide receivers, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, I'm going to list both of them as fringe options. I do think there's a real chance that Roma Dunze kind of steps in here and takes over as the wide receiver 1, but interested in just seeing a full game here out of these guys. And then sitting Luther Burden, Olamide Zaccheaus. As of right now, Olamide has, kind of locked down that wide receiver 3 role. I think throughout the season, we see Luther Burden kind of overtake that, but week one, not considering playing either of those dudes. And so that is going to wrap it up for every single week one matchup. I appreciate the feedback you guys gave me in the running back start sit video about doing start sits or, just early rankings early on in the season or throughout the season. What I kind of settled on is I think I'm going to do the start sits, but next to the player, I'm also going to have the ranking. So pretty much combining the two together, I feel like that's a pretty solid compromise. And I do like talking about, every single matchup. So getting both things in there, I do think will work. If you guys, think that's a good idea, let me hear it. If you enjoy, hit the like button, subscribe. Stay tuned tomorrow for the waiver wire video. I'll have the positional rankings coming out a few days after that. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.